Hello, my friends. Leo Babauta from Zen Habits here. So good to be here with you today. One thing I want to note as we get started is that I have my house has been shaking all day because of construction going on right outside. So if you hear some rattling or some loud, machinery, I apologize for it, but nothing I can do about that. I am just really glad to be here talking with you. So in this video, I want to talk about cultivating joy in a minimalist lifestyle. And this is a part of a kind of a series of videos that I want to create on minimalist lifestyle. But cultivating joy is something that I think is really important because if you're someone who wants to be a minimalist, that means not a lot of stuff in your life, not a lot of complications in what you're doing, and you take a really minimalist approach to everything or most things. If you want to have a minimalist lifestyle, there can be a sense, there's the shaking, there can be a sense of asceticism, which is like I'm being really Spartan and like sparse and kind of hardcore is the feeling. And it can just also feel like it's empty and deprived. And so, if that's the kind of feeling that you're getting from minimalism, I want to say that actually minimalism can be full of abundance and joy and play. It's just about how we go about creating that in our lives. So let's back up and we're going to talk about minimalism in general, and then we're going to talk about why we feel deprived sometimes, where we get the sources of our joy that are often surface level joy, and then actually how to create a deeper sense of joy in our lives with a minimalist lifestyle. Again, my video might be shaking a little bit. My whole house is being rattled right now. Um, which is maybe like how we are in the world. Maybe our whole world is being rattled, right? Okay, so what is a minimalist lifestyle? Maybe I should back up and talk about that first. So minimalism is it's an approach to life, and I am one of the original, the OG minimalists from back in the day. In fact, I believe that I was one of the people responsible for really popularizing the idea of minimalism as a lifestyle. I was writing about simplicity in Zen habits back in 2007, and there wasn't really a whole minimalism movement, but I wrote some articles in Zen habits back in that year that spawned a number of other, I wouldn't say people who are copying me. They were people who were already doing this, but just didn't necessarily have a name for the movement. They were already looking to simplify themselves, and they heard the word minimalism, which I didn't invent, and I'm not trying to claim credit for inventing minimalism, but I wrote about it, and it started to spread that idea. There weren't a lot of people talking about it back then. And then it became a thing. And there was even a Netflix documentary, which I was in. But the idea is what if we didn't need to live with so much, which is an ancient idea, right? Like there's people who talked about simplicity going back to thousands of years. So these are ascetics in a lot of different cultures, for example. People who rejected the kind of cultural norms of like accumulating and showing off our wealth. And so I am one of those. I follow along a long ancient line of people who are into simplicity. And the idea is, what if we didn't need so much stuff in order to live our lives? What if we could get satisfaction from non-stuff? What if we didn't need so much clutter? What if we could live with very little? And that then could be applied to everything, a minimalist fitness regime where we didn't need a whole, gym, but we could actually just, have natural fitness outside, for example, with very little equipment. Or maybe we don't need crazy amount of things in our kitchen in order to have very simple, healthy food. Or maybe we don't need a lot of stuff on our phones and be like constantly filled with digital clutter. So minimalism is about thinking in terms of What would it be like to have less in our lives, to take a simpler approach, and to not need so much, but actually to enjoy the space between things, to enjoy a life full of space? Maybe that would be more peaceful. And so people started to take this approach, and some of them went really hardcore. What if I could just live with just 50 things in my life? I was one of those, right? And so it's like hardcore. I'm going to live with like nothing in my house and just a bare, empty floor. And I actually saw like articles and videos of people just having no couch, no chairs, just sitting on the floor, which I think is amazing, right? Not the route that I went, but I'm inspired by people who just take things to an extreme like that. I'm one of those. So we get to this hardcore minimalism, but it's like, but I've taken out everything in my life, all of the joy, all of the fun. Like, what now, right? So, this hardcore ascetic style of minimalism, I think is not bad, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. What if you could have like a more relaxed approach to minimalism, to simplicity, right? But where can we find joy in a lifestyle like this? Is the question that I wanted to talk about in this video. And I think that is it makes us reflect on where do we get joy in our lives? What makes us happy? And I think the mistake that a lot of people make is that we need external things to be happy or to have joy or to have fun. And so, this is how we fall into the trap of buying way too much stuff is like, oh, my life feels really sad right now. Let me go online and start ordering crap, right? And then I get things to go into my house that I'm like excited with they're on their way, which is a cool little feeling, right? Then when it comes, I'm like, yay, it came. And then a day later, I don't really care about that anymore and I need to repeat, right? And so then all of a sudden, my life becomes filled with a bunch of stuff because I think that's going to make me feel some kind of joy in my life. And it kind of does to some extent, but it's not very long lasting. And then I need to go and get my next hit, and my bank account empties while my house fills up with stuff. And I don't get any happier. My life isn't filled with joy. In fact, I feel more depressed because it's not actually working, right? So that's with stuff. It can happen with food too. I need to go out and buy like whatever treats that I want, or go to the coolest restaurant, or constantly like get joy through food, and then it's gone. And I like it did give me a little bit of pleasure, but it didn't last very long. And then I need to go and do it again. And so there's nothing wrong with, finding pleasure in food. I love food, but it can, again, drain our bank account. It can be very short lasting and surface level and not lead to longer satisfaction. It can be tough on our waistlines as well. Not that we need to focus on that so much, but it can lead to long-term kind of not only weight gain but health problems if that's kind of the way that we seek pleasure. And then we do the same kind of cycle with digital pleasures, scrolling on short form video, or whatever it is, games, whatever it is that we do digitally that gives us some kind of pleasure. We get caught up in this cycle of I need to do it, do it, do it. And then we just need it more because you get a diminishing return on the pleasure that you get from all of this stuff. And so this is actually how all of us kind of look to satisfy ourselves. And if you think you're immune to it, I doubt it. There's very few people who are immune to this. Now you might have conquered the specific ones that I talked about, but maybe there's another place. So for some people, they're productivity junkies. I'm going to be a workaholic. For others, maybe their joy comes in gossiping and complaining, right? So there's lots of kinds of ways that we might do this. Alcohol, drugs. I need to have my wine to have any kind of pleasure at night, whatever it is. And so partying, going out and going to the clubs, sex, there's a lot of things that we might do. And so A minimalism kind of lifestyle asks us to re-examine where we're getting our happiness. If we remove all of the external things, then what? And actually, what some people find, this is actually why minimalism doesn't last for some people, is that they will strip their lives bare and then feel really down because they've just stripped all of the joy out of their lives. And you can only feel down in a bare life for a little while. So I'm going to give you a few ideas of where we can find joy that isn't in this kind of cycle of I need the next kind of dopamine hit. So the first thing that's really interesting is if we strip our lives bare, which I'm not saying you need to do, but imagine that you did, and you were sitting in an empty room. Then what? Where can you find contentment, happiness, peace, joy, love? Well, there's a few places we might look that isn't about buying a bunch of stuff, bunch of digital kind of pleasures, food pleasures, drink pleasures, drug pleasures, that kind of stuff. You can find pleasure, joy, play, love with other people. So maybe instead of going for all of those things, you sit and have a beautiful conversation with someone. Get curious about them, share stories, tell jokes, do something, go for a hike together, explore something together, a topic. Maybe you form a book club. Books are actually another nice one. And in order to avoid huge amounts of books, I do have some books. I read digitally, and I find that to be a nice use of my digital devices is reading. So I think that can be another source of joy is sit down and do some reading. Listen to some music. Maybe you have Spotify or Apple Music or whatever it is, and just listen to whole albums. Listen to new artists. Go back and listen to your favorite ones. So these are some things. I think watching movies is a nice form for me as well. Um, I think cooking healthy food is fun for me. Getting outdoors is another one and doing it with a sense of adventure and play or looking for wonder, go for an awe walk, AWE. Um, look for, things to be like blown away by in life. Another one is learning. So right now I'm like super obsessed with learning chess. Been obsessed with it for the last 5 months. And I find a lot of joy in learning something. And specifically in this case, chess, I'm finding a lot of joy in diving into it and learning about it and progressing without being really good at it. But if you want to learn something else, that's totally cool. Learn history, learn a language, learn science, learn a skill. There's so much cool things you can learn these days. Now, that can also lead to you buying a whole bunch of stuff. And so you want to try and do that learning without buying too much. But, sometimes you want to buy a little bit. Can you find joy in moving yourself, moving your body, um, just enjoying the beauty of nature and the outdoors and, quiet moments? So these are all things that aren't necessarily the only source of joy, but for me, they are some that I would really recommend you explore. Maybe you want to sit and journal. Maybe you want to meditate. Maybe you want to reflect on things. Maybe you want to dig into philosophy. These are all things we can do without very much stuff. Access to the internet is really helpful for all of that stuff, for a lot of it at least. I'm not against technology, so you can use digital things, including your phone or computers, to dig into some of this stuff or to use it for inspiration. But we don't need to have technology with us all the time. We can go outdoors. We can read paper books borrowed from the library, and so we can disconnect from digital devices a lot of times. And I think that actually is a real key to finding joy. But the other piece is an internal one, which is a shift in our mindset and actually opening our hearts to joy. Can we actually feel the wonder and awe and gratitude and miraculousness and curiosity that we could have about the world around us, people around us, about ourselves? Deepen into all of this stuff with a sense of, wow, like life can be amazing. And this is where the real source of joy is our willingness to take our experience of the world and to really feel lit up by all of it. And that is a practice, turning on of our hearts and our minds. Can we be open to the experience of life? Another thing that I want to talk about is aliveness. When we keep ourselves in the comfort zone of buying stuff online, eating all these comfort foods, numbing ourselves out with food and digital things and alcohol and drugs, we are actually denying ourselves access to aliveness. When we step out of our comfort zone into something that is scary and uncertain, but still full of adventure, that is when we feel the most alive. When you get on stage and you do improv or dance in a musical, when you introduce yourself to strangers or go to a new thing and just take a shot at life. When you take a risk and put yourself out there, when you do something new that you suck at but that is like a lot of fun, that is where we get a feeling of aliveness, that we are to some degree living on the edge. Not necessarily like the edge where you might actually be in danger. You don't have to be doing some kind of crazy, thrill-seeking adventure every single day. But could you take a little bit of a risk? Could you try something new? Could you try sucking at something? Could you risk being vulnerable? And through this kind of risk, we start to feel more alive. And that's what I really want to advocate for, is aliveness in our day. Taking risks, going on adventures, trying new things, exploring, being curious, and then feeling the wonder of life. That is an endless source of joy, even when your life is stripped bare. Not that you need to, but a minimalist lifestyle can include so much abundant joy without needing to spend a lot of money. And so I wish you a joyful exploration of joy in your lives, whether or not you embrace the minimalist lifestyle. But just realize we don't really need very much at all to find this joy. Here's wishing you joy in your day-to-day and in your lives. I'm Leo Babauta from Zen Habits. Please like this video if it was valuable to you. Subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this. Share this with people who could use some Zen habits in their lives. And may you have a joyful, peaceful Zen day. I'll talk to you all later.